I think of the life of a miner who must work all his day underground, where his lamplight is all that will shine there, and it's dark and it's damp all around. It is 2 or 3 miles to the coal face, and the tunnel is jagged and low, but he cannot find work on the surface, so it's down in the mines he must go.
Well, when the mines closed in Rigna back in 1990, Father Sean Tynan was the parish priest in Kilronan at the time. Indeed, he would have guided a lot of families through the times of the mines closure, and at the same time was very much to the fore in setting up new enterprises to bring into the area. One of those enterprises, which is very much associated with this particular project, was the establishment of the Miners' Way. And indeed, when that particular project was being put together, our next two guests, Jim Gaffney and Kieran Guihen, were very much, I suppose, part and parcel of going out with Father Tynan and mapping the routes and finding out maybe what routes that the miners went, and indeed the routes that were now very much part of the fabric of the Miners' Way in 2024. Gentlemen, you're very welcome. Thank you both indeed for joining us this evening. Kieran, I'll start off with yourself. We've heard it many times about Father Tynan when it comes to his interest in tourism and the ideas that he had. The comparison was often made, he was a little bit like Kilronan's answer to Monsignor Horan over in Knock. Fair?
Definitely, and for the simple reason he didn't take no for an answer. I remember that in the early stages, landing up, I was up at home in Ahabehi one evening, he landed, and he had a bag in his back, and he took it off. I was wondering what was going to happen here, and he took out these maps and put them on the table, and they were stuck together with sellotape, or not sellotape, but masking tape. He was looking for sweat houses. That was the start of it. And I'd say he probably documented, I know up at our end, he documented a lot of the sweat houses. And he had found sweat houses that had been fallen in and that, and he was nearly close to tears when he'd see them. Yeah. But from that on, then he started on it with the walk. And I remember in the early stage, I think it was Liam Keaveney and Jim used to be out with him, and then he'd land to me at night time and he'd say, "We'll go and have a look. There's an old place up there that mightn't be in great shape after last weekend." Yeah. And he liked walking at night time as well as the daytime.
I was just going to say that many of us would have memories of maybe meeting him, and the pit helmet light would be what he'd be coming with. And Jim, you could meet him at any hour of the night coming with this light. And for a lot of people, he probably scared the living daylights out of them initially because he was well ahead of his time. They're commonplace now where people are walking around with these lights, but it wasn't always the case. Father Tynan was one of the first to have them.
Well, I think he may have came in maybe in the early summer originally to here, but as he got used to the place, he would nearly prefer to walk. He used to actually walk into a Rigna Mass or a weekly Mass mornings from Keechu, and he'd walk back out again. But then if there was then I think that following autumn, I suppose, was the stations, which were very relevant at the time in the community, and people would be looking at their watches. The station might be at 7:30, but there mightn't be any sign of Father Tynan. But he might arrive 50. It took him a little while to gauge the distances from Keechu to the lower ends of the parish. Yeah. But he slowly did that, and he'd arrive with his bag on his back and a light on his head in the autumn, and do his station mass, and wouldn't be in any rush to leave, only try to gather as much information from the locality as he could. But I suppose that was part of his way of getting to know the people and to get to know the area, because I suppose when he came to here originally, he was in Drumshanbo, and he had a bit of knowledge about Rigna, but probably not, apart from the pupils from Rigna that went to second school in Drumshanbo. That was his, I suppose, engagement, and they all seemed to love him very much, because he was a man of very few, I suppose, practicalities. I think once he got his cup of tea and a sandwich, that Father Tynan would go the day on that. And I suppose a lot of people, and Kieran will probably back me up with this, he needed arm twisting to eat proper food, because he was literally a workaholic, and he hardly took time to sit still to nearly to eat. Yeah. That was the type of him. So I suppose that was the interaction he had with the community initially, but then he seen all the other aspects that he saw that would be a benefit to the community, and I suppose he kind of developed them through that.
As Jim mentioned, Kieran, not alone was he a religious teacher in Drumshanbo, but he was also, I suppose, somebody where people from the parish would have come into contact with when they were in fourth year and they did a school play or a musical. And he carried on that tradition very much when he came here, the Kilronan players, the Arigna Capers back in the day as well. So he was somebody that was so much invested in the community. When he asked for something, it was often very difficult to say no to him.
He was like yourself, John. You couldn't say no to him. He, I know. I remember the Capers. I think it was the first time we seen your talents coming through. You were one of the stars. No, you were very. You shone through that time. But one thing about Father Tynan and anyone that went walking with him, I'd tell you, he didn't like the tarred road. You had to take a path. You had to cross a ditch into a field. He was happiest when he was going through fields and if there was foxes or anything to be seen. But he'd very little walking. When he was on his own, he'd go on the tarred road. But if there was anyone with him, he was through a field, and he loved getting mucked up, and that was.
In many ways, Jim, he'd have been somebody that perhaps seen the tourism potential of the area long before anybody else.
Well, he did. My initial involvement with him was, I suppose, I happened to be I was working on the fish farm, and we had got to know him, because as an avid fisherman he was very interested in the salmon farms that was on Loch Allen, and I had probably known him maybe from the middle to the late 80s, because I was working on the salmon farm in Loch Allen, and Father Tynan would be a regular fisherman on the lake, and he would hop on the cages and he'd have a look, and he was very interested in that type of an industry. But then I suppose when the mines closed, I suppose we were looking for different aspects of trying to improve the community, as obviously the mines, the community really didn't know anything different when you have a couple of hundred people made unemployed, and it's a huge shock to the community and to the people involved. And Father Tynan probably looked at Arigna and he seen that it had an awful lot more to offer in other ways. So he was very interested and an avid walker, but he decided, I suppose, in his mind, well, this is huge potential, because he always used to speak about, the walks in Europe and how the national French and Germans, it was a huge hobby of some of the continental countries. So he said, well, we have some very unbelievable scenery in this part of the community, in this part of the world, and I suppose he kind of tried to get the community to buy into that. And by doing so, he kind of formed a kind of a core group of people that for maybe 2 years, that there wasn't a weekend he wasn't exploring some part of the valley or some part of the mountains around here and further afield. As we know, the Miners' Way now starts off below, literally in Dowra, and it goes the whole way to the top of the mountains, the Curlews and Boyle and into Boyle. So he was always expanding and trying to expand it and make it as big and as viable as possible. But my initial, I suppose, was introduction to his, I suppose, thought and development was that one night, I think he might have had said, well, I don't know, I can't really remember who was there, but I think Peter McNiff was one that was originally from Arigna that lived in Keju, and myself, and I'm not sure who else was there at the time, but there was probably a few callers anyway to Father Tynan that night, and he literally had the big dining room table covered in about 4 different layers of every Ordnance Survey map, going back as far as whenever they were drawn up in the early 1850s, and probably every edition that was afterwards, he had them layered upon layered, and they had held a wealth of information of paths, depending on what year, whether it was 1911 or whenever the maps were actually drawn, you probably had a different path going to a different mine on the Ahabeti side of the mountain, or Dornovogi, and even on the Ballyfernan side. And all these maps showed defined pathways and right-of-ways that were, I suppose, were there for many generations. But he looked at them and and said, look, some of these are being used today, and why can we not incorporate them into some type of a walk? And I suppose over a 12-month period, I suppose in '93 that he probably what we now know as the Miners' Way was put together on paper and in physicality, in putting it down as getting it developed. He went and he talked to all the farmers that own landowners, and let's put it this way: I don't think nobody ever refused him. And as we know today, the walk is a huge tourism attraction in the sense that, you know, you could be out up in Glen on a Sunday and you could see 5 people either walking down from Glen Church, or you could see 5 people coming from the Lynch's side of the mountain. And, you know, people probably don't see it as much, but, you know, there's always people out there walking on it, you know, and it's a huge testament to him and his efforts that, you know, that is really a life-standing thing that's going to be here for many generations to come. And like Father Tynan was the man that was the brains, I suppose, to get it started, and now it's a continuation of that.
Yeah, he has such a legacy left, there's no doubt about that. Kieran, one of the big things about it as well was that he quietly worked on the preservation of many historical sites. And you think of maybe the likes of the Famine Graveyard on Stanton's Mountain, Doon would be another site as well. He's seen the importance and he realised the importance of many of these sites, and he was very keen to make sure that they were preserved and remembered.
Yeah, and like with the walks as well, he tried to share that with other people. He tried to bring the walks with, say, anywhere near those sites, waterfalls or anything like that. He was always sort of, well, we know about it now. Doon was the one that bet him. He couldn't get the walk around by Doon, but he done it. I remember Joss Lynham was the man that was passing the walks, and Joss, Lord have mercy on him, Joss landed down on a Friday. And Father Tynan had been out on the Friday before it, and there was one section very wet. Now, Josh was an avid walker, and he landed with a pair of walking boots and a pair of shorts. And as Father Tynan said, well, if he goes down the certain fields, he'll be lost. So that night, we went up with markers and we stuck down new markers to bring it around a different way. But we brought Joss Lynham around the dry path. We met a local bachelor, and he was talking to us. He said, "Oh, what are you at? Sure, the walk doesn't come this way at all." He said, "It comes up through them fields down there." And for feck's sake, Father Tynan, you can do nothing. But anyhow, Josh only laughed. I'd say he knew himself that it couldn't be. It'd be a bit more warden if those walks at it. But it just shows you how he got caught.
So many, Jim, as you mentioned, so many of the big projects here. You think of the mining experience that we've just talked about, the likes of Kilronan and Castle. So many of the projects that are now thankfully flourishing in the area today, you could link them back in one shape or form of another to Father Tynan.
Yeah, well, Father Tynan, I suppose he looked at everything that was in the parish, and I think he looked. Well, the mining museum was a project that was, I suppose, born out of, you know, a few people saying, look, the history of the area has to be preserved. And there was, I suppose, for a couple of years, there was a committee, and they looked at different, we'd say, similar type of tourism projects all over the country. And then it was kind of with ACDC, and they decided, I think, you know, that I think the location, was the one that was beating them for a while, and I think Father Tynan kind of took the bull by the horns and said maybe to a few people that was on that committee, look, the funding is there, but we have to decide and where it is, and like where the present mine experience now is, tunnel, that was there, and all it was like, as we can see from photographs before it was developed, was just a hole in the ground and the water flowing out and down the mountainside. And it took, I suppose, it was a brave decision to make at the time to make that move, that this was going to be the location. And like and in hindsight now, it has turned out to be like very iconic in the sense of the view over the valley and its location, you know, because it's easy accessible and it gives we'd say, for instance, the wider public and the tourism public easy access to the community, to what we have here in the community. And I suppose, like, it's going to be like everything else, Father Hines' name will always be, associated with it, because he had the foresight to keep pushing the community to make sure that it happened and that the history was preserved.
He had very subtle ways in maybe bringing it home to people, the beauty of the area that they lived in. And one of those examples that was come to mind, and I think he was always blessed with good weather when it came to Good Friday. He had the Stations of the Cross, even coming from the church in Arigna up the road here to where the mining experience is. Again, a unique idea, but what he was doing was he was getting people into the area to attend that religious service, and not alone were they attending the service on Good Friday, he was also subtly maybe just showing what's here, what can be seen.
What can be seen, yeah. And that you did mention Good Friday, John. I remember after service one Good Friday, he said to me, "We'll go for a walk tonight." I said, "All right." So he hit off and he up Cross Hill. And now this was after the service was late, but the weather was lovely. And we went across over towards Den Connors and came down towards Kilronan, down through the forest. But there was no hotel or anything there at the time. I was coming out at the gates of Kilronan. Next thing, this light appeared. This man hopped out of a Land Rover with a shotgun. "Hold it, lads." So anyway, I don't know. I think he got a bigger hop when he saw Father Tynan. But it was a local farmer, and he seen our lights coming across the top of Cross Hill and coming right down through the woods. And he thought it was people stealing sheep. And he bet us that now Father Tynan got a great laugh out of that. He said, "Well, I didn't think we were this far into the Wild West," he said to me.
People out at that hour of the night.
Yeah.
Jim, his probably greatest qualities, and it's widely said after his death as well, he was somebody who never sought any rewards or any credit. He just wanted to get the job done nice and quietly, and he faded into the background then after that.
I think the biggest or the greatest example of that was, I think, maybe, I don't know whether it was the first or second Capers, but I think the committee on maybe the cast, I think, wanted to make a presentation to Father Tynan for his efforts. And like, I can tell you, as you know, John, the Capers thing, it was nice that he'd be tearing his hair out. This isn't going to happen. And, you'd have a few then in the background, a few people that shall remain nameless, but they'll probably know themselves one of the biggest tricksters that ever set foot in Arigna Hall when the Capers was being rehearsed, and maybe when the shows were actually in
progress.
But let's put it this way: I distinctly remember them Father Tynan being asked to come forward, and he literally had to be pushed from the back room up to the front of the stage to accept something that was being given to him, and like, he never wanted any recognition for that, and like, I suppose if you talk to anybody that was involved in those shows over those 3 winters and springs, like, it was a real, I think, a real lift to the community, because like we saw, I think most years that maybe at least 5 shows were put on, and maybe 6 in some cases. Like, the shows were booked out. The hall had a capacity of about 230 people, and it was sold out every single night. And like, the talent that was showcased at those shows, like, it was unreal. Like, when you look back on the videos or the DVDs now, like, you see that those people, and some of them like are and they're married now, and the young people that took place, and like the talent that they was in the parish. And like, it wasn't everybody from Arigna. If he thought he needed somebody from Ballyfernan or Keju, they were drafted in, and they were made part of the show. Like, and like, I suppose he found that those years, and I'd say they were part of him, kind of, without the community really knowing it. But it was a way of bringing people together, because obviously after the history of the mines closing and such a blow to the parish, I think it was, when you look back on it now, it was his way of kind of bringing the community together, which I will say I don't think there was ever a time that the community in Origna was ever as much united and all together, and there was people from every house involved in it, and if they weren't involved, they were involved in some way, some part of putting it together. And that's, I suppose, a legacy that that stands to him as well, because when you think back on it, like, everybody has very fond memories of it.
Yeah, they're great to look back on it. And Kieran, the thing about him as well, and Jim quite rightly mentioned it there, his involvement not alone in directing it, but when it came to the construction of the stage, you could go into it maybe a day or two out from it. He'd be above it, the highest scaffolding that could be shaken under and putting up lights. He'd do all that as well himself, with help from a few trusted allies such as yourselves.
And John, you have to remember, not alone did he do capers, but he done the Kilronan parish players, which was a huge undertaking as well. And he done a lot of the sets and things for that himself. He'd spend hours in the hall there in Keju. The local ladies might bring him in sandwiches in the evening, and when they'd find out he hadn't a dinner, or he just kept working away at it from early morning, or if he had mass, he'd come up to the hall and he'd spend the time in it, which was a huge undertaking after putting capers through his. After putting some of the heroes on capers through his hands.
And to take on another production. Jim, we've touched on so many of his legacies will remain on to this day. But I suppose for those of us that were lucky enough to be of an age when capers were going on with the Kilronan players and remember him in setting up various projects, he was somebody, that the Miners' Way is just one of his legacies, but he was somebody that left, an everlasting impression on anybody that had close contact with him.
He did, because I suppose he treated everybody as, he made them feel that they were playing a part in whatever project that he was involved in. He brought them to a point, that, you're playing a part in it. And most of themselves, to many, but it probably would have never taken place. Like, the amount of people that, that was involved when the walks were being set up. Like, there wasn't a Sunday, maybe for a year, that he hadn't some walk planned in his head. And he'd say to 5, 6 or 7 or 8 people, well, we'll go in such a place Sunday. And in the hope that they'd bring somebody with them as well. And he was an extraordinary man in those ways, because, like, he was thinking, I'd say he probably, and he seemed to be a person that needed very little sleep. And I'd say even when he was sleeping, he was thinking of how he could expand on what he was doing,
Yeah. Kieran, I suppose, in many ways, when you pass by the hall in Origna where the capers used to take place and other venues, you remember walking in the door, you could get the smell of the tobacco from the pipe, you can still see the ashes maybe on the black sweater where he'd be doing it. There's so many iconic images of him that are ingrained in people's minds.
Yeah, well, that's definitely one. Any on the few working holes as well, not alone as they from the ashes. And do you remember at the time he got a pup at one stage?
Yeah.
And he used to take the pup out for a walk, but he was lifting the pup across a stile one day, and whatever way he caught the pup or something, he must have nipped him on the hands, but that finished the pup coming on the walk. I think he was adopted somewhere else after that.
Yeah. One of the stories I can remember from capers at the time as well, he was way ahead of himself with technology. And I remember him landing one evening with a cordless microphone, a radio microphone. And he was telling a few of us in the hall how he says, if you go up and stand at the gates of the church or the steps of the church, we'll be able to hear you down here on the speakers. So he sent me up to the gates of the church, indulged me for a minute and I tell the story. So I got to the steps of the church and I said, Father, if you can hear me now, come out to the back window and wave. And sure enough, he came out and he waved. So I was walking back down towards the church and another member of the cast came down Chapel Hill in the car at the same time. I won't name any names, but you'll probably guess who. So he stopped to give me a lift, but I never told him I had the microphone in the car. So this same man, I asked him, I said, are you going to rehearsals tonight? He says, I'm not. He said, I'm going to a music session that's taking place somewhere. And I said, what will you tell the priest? He says, I'll tell him there's a cow calving. And all this was going out of the speakers in the hall. So myself and this other gentleman walked into the hall after this. The whole place was silent. And Father Sean was above on the stage and he turned around. He says, oh God, look. And he says, whatever this man's name was. Great to see you. I was afraid there'd be a cow or something calving tonight that you might be here. So he had a great sense of humour.
He played up to your trick.
Yeah.
He did. He didn't let you down.
Jim, you'd have seen that sense of humour many times in him as well.
I would have, but there was another side to Father Tynan that, you know, some people that weren't really close to him wouldn't have seen. But like, he was the most determined person. If something that was going wrong or that wasn't working out for him, he would persevere until, if it was took hours, he'd do it. You know, he was a very determined individual as well. You know, and I suppose that drove him on to do a lot of these things. But like, if he needed to be, you know, strict or, you know, or had that bit of a steel to him, there was that steel to him that you know, some people probably didn't see, but it was there, I can tell you.
Yeah, he always made sure he got things done, and he did get things done, Kieran, and accomplished so much in his time in Drumshanbo here in Kilronan.
Definitely. And not alone, like, was he producing the plays and the capers, but he was also doing the electrical work. Now we're lucky enough, I think we had Paul Kelly and Colin O'Donnell and Sean McMurray to throw an eye over it, but he done the work anyway. Now there might be a bit of changing to be done, but everyone came safe anyway.
Yeah, well,
luckily enough.
Well, look, it's only right and fitting that he should be remembered on the Miners' Way project, and he certainly was the brains and the man that had the vision for a lot of these walks that people are on when they're watching this video, and it's great to remember him. You know him better than most. Thank you both so much indeed for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
I think of the life of the miner who must work all his day underground, where his lamplight is all that will shine there, and it's dark and it's damp all around. It is 2 or 3 miles to the coal face, and the tunnel is jagged and low, but he cannot find work on the surface, so it's down in the mines he must go.